Hello, nerds. Welcome to the History of Nerds United podcast. I'm your head nerd, Brendan. Today, author Nita Whitaker, although just to say author is really shortchanging her. In the beginning, we talk about all the stuff that she does. Author is just what we're talking about today. Wrote a book called When Your Hand is in the Lion's Mouth. It's about her dad and all the wisdom that he's passed on to her over the years. It's a really fun book. It's a really positive book. I really enjoyed it. It's just a daughter that loves dad, and he's had some nuggets of wisdom, and she wanted to pass it on. Really good read. Great to talk to her. She's an immensely positive person like her father. Let me shut up and let's get to that then. Nita Whitaker. Let's bring her on. All right, here we are. Nita Whitaker, author of When Your Hand is in the Lion's Mouth. Nita, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to talk about the book. I want to talk about your dad, but first we need to talk about you a little bit. Let's talk about you grew up in Louisiana. Now, I've been to Louisiana a couple of times, mainly in New Orleans, or as I believe you would say, Nolens.
No, we say New Orleans.
Okay. I just wanted to sound fancy. That's what I was
I know, but that was quite fancy. Very good.
So what was it like growing up in Louisiana? I think a lot of people have heard of it, but again, they know Baton Rouge and New Orleans.
Right.
You weren't growing up in the big city. What was it like growing up for you in Louisiana?
I was in Shreveport. It was the third largest city in the state. And Louisiana has a cultural divide starting about Alexandria south, and then everything else is north. North Louisiana, where I was raised, was very Bible Belt. Everything was, we called it fried, dyed, and laid to the side. That was the kind of food we ate. Where down south, there was more of a party atmosphere. Up north, more people were Baptist, fundamental, evangelical, and Pentecostal. Where down below, they were more Catholic, but there was also a bigger party spirit, more the Creole culture, the Mardi Gras, all of the festivals and parades. That was more of a South Louisiana thing. And they did not meet when I was growing up. It was a different culture when I was growing up. Not that one was bad or good. It was just different. I grew up in that Bible Belt, Southern Black Baptist, let me say, eating soul food. That's kind of, and down south, you have the Creole food with the gumbo and all of that stuff that now it's all kind of meshed in together. Since Katrina, people moved south, people from the south moved north. So everybody's kind of doing Mardi Gras everywhere now. It used to just be a New Orleans thing. Used to just be a thing you did in that part, down to Thibodaux, Lafayette, not Lafayette so much, but below Alexandria, south of Alexandria, Baton Rouge, all of those places used to do all that. And I didn't grow up with that, but it is part of the life in Shreveport now. A sleepy town, probably at that time was about 100 when I was a small child, probably 150,000. I think it's grown to about 300,000 now. My neighborhood was called Cedar Grove, and it used to be a grove of cedars, but it became a neighborhood for, middle to upper class Black families. And I knew all of my neighbors. I played in the street with my friends, my neighbors. My aunts and uncles lived all around us. There was one, a street or two or three over, because my dad's from a very large family. So it was idyllic in a lot of ways. I felt safe. I felt seen. I felt also the ceilings placed on me as a Black woman. But I don't like the word no. That wasn't for me. I was like, okay, maybe you can't, but I can. So I always had a can-do spirit that I got from my dad and my mom. So it was great. It was a great childhood, a great place. And certainly there were prejudices, but I was shielded. I was the baby girl. So some of that I missed. I was just above the fray, and I missed some of the stuff that my sisters even experienced. I was just guided through this life, and not without some scarring, not without some things that happened, but I grew up with a sense of well-being and a sense of being in a family, and a smaller family and a bigger family that loved each other. So I had a good gift.
And I mean, you are in a lot of ways a trailblazer. So, talking about reaching ceilings and kind of busting through them as well, you were Miss Louisiana when that was not necessarily a thing for a Black woman at that time. What was that like?
Not at all. I will give tribute to all of the ladies that I competed with, because I didn't have any enemies that I knew of. I was the only woman of color in all the pageants I competed. I competed in pageants for 6 years because I didn't win the first time because they weren't ready for me. And I had some growing to do as well. I didn't know anything about pageants. I wasn't a pageant kid. I didn't watch the pageant thinking, oh, that could be me, because Miss America didn't really show me that. But I knew that I wanted to sing. And I thought that the pageants gave me a stage. And if I could get to that stage at Miss America, that would be a national stage. So that was my goal. My goal wasn't to be Miss Louisiana. That was a step along the way. And I'm grateful for it. And I didn't know at the time, I didn't really get it, that it was historical. Because in my mind, because I'm ambitious, I'm hardwired that way. I'm a gold seeker and a gold tamer. I'm like, one down, what's next? One down, what's next? I saw that as attainable when so many people thought it was unattainable. And I remember going to the pageant saying, where are the other brown girls? Surely somebody else wants to try this. It can't just be me. Surely, where are they? And I think the thinking was, they're not going to let me win, so why do I even want to try? And my thought was, well, they're going to have to let me win because I'm not going to stop trying. That's just how I'm wired. I don't believe that a certain aesthetic or skin tone determines who you are as a human. And I knew that I had every attribute that checked off the boxes for what a Miss Louisiana could be, except I was brown. So I didn't accept that, because I'm like, if they can see me and see my heart and my spirit and my intellect and my talent, then they've got to let me in. I didn't know until years later, when I was at my grandmother's funeral and we're at the graveside. Honest to goodness. I mean, people said things, oh, but I didn't take it in. I was just on to the next goal. And I was grateful for the opportunity to represent my state as being the first woman of color to do so. But I also felt like I won't be the last. There are a lot of women who have the same attributes that are supposed to embody what the Miss America ideal is. They just come here in brown packages, beautiful brown packages, but until one breaks the ceiling and it can be shown, oh, yes, she can be, or she is, she does hold all those qualities. They can't see it. So I was at my grandmother's graveside and we were burying my mother's mother. And this lady walked over me and she shook my hand and she said, I never thought I'd get to meet you, to shake your hand. And I was like, who does she think I am? Hi. And she was like, you don't know what it meant to us. And I didn't know. And I got emotional in the moment because I had never thought about it like that. I don't know even now that I still take it in for what it means to the community, what it meant for Louisiana. Governor Edwin Edwards was there when I was crowned. And his comment in the newspaper the next day was, it shows our changing racial views. Nothing about my talent, nothing about my intellect, just that it shows our changing racial views. I'll take that as a win. It's time for stuff to change. Let's change it. If I can be the change agent, let's go.
Now, it's just a tiny part of the book, but I do want to focus on it because you're very positive about your pageant experience. And I think, especially nowadays, just saying it, pageants get a bad rap and it's it's just a beauty contest. That's all it is. Well, first of all, it wasn't like you were just walking around singing all day and then going up on a stage. What was your day job at this point in time?
Well, my day job was ICU nursing. I was a registered nurse. I was working 7P to 7A. I was working in a surgical intensive care unit. Initially I started working in med-surg when I got out of school. And then I moved back to Shreveport and I was working at Shumpert Medical Center when it was a hospital. It's no longer there. It's something else now. But I worked in their 19-bed surgical intensive care unit. And sometimes they'd float me over to the medical intensive care where they took care of open hearts. But in ours, we took care of people coming out of surgery that had any kind of vascular or neurological burn victims. We had so many things. I learned so much. That was what kept me going. That was how I was able to support myself because I knew, I could be a struggling artist and eating peanut butter, or I could be a struggling artist with a job. And I wanted a job, but I also loved science and math. I have this nurture nature. I like to take care of things. I've had 4 dogs at one time. I take care of things. I tell my friends that when I'm not taking care of something, you need to call someone and check on me because something is not right. I'm a caretaker. And it was a natural extension for me. I wanted to go to medical school, but my mother had passed away in my first semester of college. And I knew that was just an expense my dad could not take on. And I didn't want to burden him with that. But I thought if I'm a nurse, I can work right next to the doctor. And, we kind of know a lot. Sometimes we would know what to do, but we still have to call the doctor and get the order, even though we know what to do. But that was what I did, and what I did for quite a few years until I was able to make the leap to focus just on my career and not have to, pull those 12-hour shifts.
Now, I don't want to start any problems for you professionally, but I do have a question, right? So you are an honest-to-God ICU nurse. Fast forward a few years, you're on Grey's Anatomy. Now, I know I was in the Army, so if I watch, a military movie that doesn't quite have all that stuff right, drives me nuts. I'm like, that's not how that works. Did you have any of that experience on Grey's Anatomy where, one of the actresses is like, give me 50 cc's, and you're like, 50 cc's will kill somebody. What are you talking about? Did it happen? You don't have to tell me who it was or anything like that. I'm just asking if it happened.
No. Well, the role I played was Marcia, and she was a physical therapist. So it was away from nursing, and that was the only kind of medical scene in there, except I was helping Debbie Allen, who was in the scene with me, to learn how to walk and get on a treadmill after some incident. The times that I've watched the show, I know that they have a medical consultant because they have been very precise. I haven't. Some other shows, that's the IV. No, this places where you would put a CVP line there, but for the most part, that show has been so successful because they must have a medical consultant. They get it right. They have the jargon right. They have the medical leads right. They have the medical terminology correct. They've done their homework, and that's why they've been successful. So I didn't have any of that in Grey's. I just had a ball. Debbie Allen and Jim Pickett were the ones I did my scene with, and I saw all the other actors that were there. Not everyone in the cast was there the day that we shot. We shot on location in a home, and it was a fantastic experience. I wanted to be able to go to set every day. I mean, that's an actor's dream. And a lot of the roles that I've gotten before Grey's Anatomy, some of them have been nurse roles. So, and that's very easy for me because I think the director can pick up on that part of me that is that. I don't usually shout, hey, I'm an RN, but I have done that. When you're on a plane and they say, do we have anybody medical on board? I usually sit and I wait to see if a doctor's going to show up. And if nobody gets up, I get up because the Florence Nightingale oath says, if you can help, you help. So that's happened a couple of times, and I've ended up sitting next to the person on the flight to make sure they stayed okay. I've been on stage in a play, in a musical, and I heard someone having some kind of incident in the audience. I said, hold my umbrella, and I went into the audience to see what was going on. Somebody was having a seizure. So once you're a nurse, you're always a nurse.
I mean, listen, we've fast forwarded through your career. We could do an entire hour on just your career, but what I wanted to do is really establish that you're killing it so that we can now rewind to go back to the man that helped you become who you are. Yes. Your dad, Green.
The foundation.
Yes. So tell me, what made you decide that you needed to write this book about your dad now? Why now as opposed to later, earlier, or anything like that?
I didn't even know I was a writer. I had spent my life singing and then acting and kind of doing both. And that was kind of what my thing was. That's what I was here in LA doing. And I lost my husband. My husband died. It took everything I had to keep going because we had children and I had to keep them going. And if I fell apart, who was going to shepherd them? I went to a workshop that was called Writing to Heal. And in that workshop, she would give us prompts. Tell us the story of the best. Tell us the story of something that needs to be Giselle. And I would write and cry. Nobody knew I was recently widowed. I just would write and cry. They would just hand me the tissue. They wouldn't ask me to act. They wouldn't. The thing was, you couldn't comment on it. You just say what you liked about whatever. And then we would write and we read what we said, whatever we wrote. I found I couldn't wait to get to the class. And then some of it I started to share with some of my email friends. And people say, Nita, you should share that. You could maybe help somebody. Out of that, I wrote my first book, which is called Finding My Voice, My Journey from Grief to Grace. It was based on the loss of my late husband, Don. And something was awakened in me. I mean, the words poured out I couldn't write fast enough. And the only reason I wanted to do it was because, not that I thought I was a great writer, I hope, always becoming better at everything that I do, but because I wanted to help somebody else who would be on this path, who would have lost a loved one. And what I learned in those darkest moments when grief has walked up and is your bedmate and it says, you stay right here, don't you get up. How do you get up? What do you show your children? So I was learning so much in my process, and I thought, let me just share this. So I started to kind of write this. And then, so that was my first book. It just kind of comes to me. I don't know what that means. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm kind of some kind of weird metaphysical thing. I'm not. But ideas kind of like, bing, oh, you have to do that. Oh, okay. All my life, I talk about my dad. Every interview my dad, and so my dad always said, and my friends would ask me, but so my dad said, your dog's barking, bite nobody but you. My dad said, I would say all these things. And I thought, I need to write these down because my dad now is 96. I had the idea for this book probably around the time I was finishing the other book, but I had life. I was raising children. I was a single parent. I was just trying to get through. So when I could see my way and I could breathe a little bit easier, I started the idea of this book. So I started about 30, 40 pages. It came, I think, at the right time. Father's Day coalesced with Juneteenth this year. And I've been working on the book for 3 years. This is not an overnight process. There's editing, there's rewriting, there's revisions, there's a process of submitting it and looking at it and stepping away from it and coming back to it and doing revisions. And sometimes you're too close to it, you can't see, you got errors. When the year turned, I thought, this is going to be the year. It's a process where your manuscript transforms from being a manuscript into being a book. And you know when that is. It's something you know inside your gut. So the book was ready, almost ready in the top of the year, but I felt like it needed one more polish. And I found this wonderful editor, and she was everything that I needed. And then I started to look at dates because my dad's birthday is in February. And I thought we should release on Dad's birthday. And I don't know, I wanted it to be, because I'm talking about a great father. And then my husband said, how about Father's Day? I said, great idea. Father's Day, a book about a great father on Father's Day. And I happen to be a Black father, Juneteenth. Even great about the resilience. So we chose that date and talked to my publicity people. And that was how it came now. And I think it couldn't have come at a more timely time when we need to hear stories about great fathers of all ethnicities, especially Black fathers. We don't have enough of that in our media. We don't hear enough about it. We don't see enough about it. And they're out there. We just don't hear about it. And if this book can be a little torchlight to shine the light on more of these great fathers who are great daddies to their children and great men in their families, then I hope this book can be that. And I hope my dad can lead the way.
I mean, it certainly helps that he has given you a bunch of gold to work with as far as the stories are concerned. Yeah. Just a relentlessly positive guy, hardworking. But I think it's important to go back to, we're talking about Louisiana. He's growing up in the Jim Crow South, which I want to stop for a second too. Jim Crow South is something you hear about, third or fourth grade, and they start teaching you about it. To me nowadays, I think to a lot of people, it's a term. It means there were racists in the South, right, at certain point, and there were laws and stuff. But what did that actually mean for your father growing up? What was his life like in the Jim Crow South that really contrasted with how positive he was and is as a person?
Right. So the Jim Crow South, and it wasn't just the South, it was a legalized and promoted racial caste system that pretty much said Black people were inferior in intellect, inferior in morality, and inferior in civil ways. The white race was superior and the Black race was cursed to be servants. This was actually written. It was an institution that was allowed and perpetuated in America from 1887 to 1960. So my dad being born into this time where you're limited in how people look at you, perceive you, any wrongdoing or inflection of wrongdoing can cost you your life, your home, everything. It was a time where you had to know how to navigate around those systems that were in place to keep you oppressed. My father did a few things like civil disobedience. If someone referred to him as boy, he'd just act like they weren't speaking to him. He just would keep on doing what he and just would ignore them, kept doing what he was doing and didn't acknowledge them at all until they called him by his name. I love that. It was when he was 13 or 14. How he figured that out, I don't know. But he also knew there was a fine line. The Whitaker family always traveled in pairs. never by themselves. This was a safety thing. This was something their father taught them. In the bubble that they lived in, Dad was born in a little town called Holly, Louisiana. In that little town, there was a bubble that they were safe because everybody was doing the same thing. They were all farmers, they were all landowners, they all had their own property, their own crop, their own fruit. They did their own peas, they shucked their own corn, they took their own cotton to the mill. They were all landowners. My grandfather owned 80 beautiful acres that had oil was discovered on it. So living in that time for him was a time where he watched his older siblings maybe navigate times that were a little bit harsher than when he came through, but still he knew there was a line he had to walk. My dad had to go in the back door of restaurants and eat in segregated restaurants. And in one story I tell, this white lady crosses the barrier and comes over to him and sees our family. We would go to this place called Big Chain Cafeteria. It was our big Sunday eat out because Mom, no cooking for Mama on Sundays. We would go there, and she came over and put her hand on my dad's shoulder, which was like, my dad was like, oh God, what do we do? You see, that was the first reaction instead of, hi, how are you? Which is what I would do now. But then my dad was like, why is this lady coming over here? What did we do? And she acknowledged that she had seen a lot of people. She had never seen a man like my dad. Asked him if he was a preacher. He said, no, I'm not a preacher. He said, you haven't been called? He said, I ain't heard nothing. But she acknowledged, because she saw him taking care of my brother who had special needs. She saw him standing until all the girls sat. She saw him being a gentleman. She saw him holding the chair for my mother. Things that his father had taught him that she hadn't seen. She said, I've traveled from Florida and I've never seen a man like you. I just came over to tell you, God bless you. This was when it was segregated. My dad worked for a very wealthy family in Louisiana, Shreveport, and they trusted him so much that his little girl was so enchanted with my father that she wouldn't eat lunch unless my father could eat with her. And this was a time when you didn't eat in the house. You didn't eat with the white families, which was crazy to me. It's crazy to me that it even existed and that America needs to say, yeah, that happened. Yeah, that happened, because the reverberation of that is still going on. Anyway, Dad was always an exception. That little girl was like, I want Mr. Green to eat with me. And she would have the housekeeper, make food for my dad so my dad could sit there and talk to the little girl and have lunch with her.
And the book is very much just like the answer you gave, which is, it's not about racism. It is about your dad, and it's in the background of everything that you tell the story and you give that context. But I want to make sure that anybody who wants to read the book and should understands that this isn't about settling scores. It's not about racism. It's about your dad who rose above all of it. And is funny as hell, too, if I might say.
Well, Daddy has a jubilant center. That's the thing that's so great about him. Like I said, even in those situations, he was always able to find the light. And as my dad, as a young man, but as my dad, he was the voice of reason, the voice of calm, the voice that soothed most of the time. I just think he came here that way. He just was. And so the book definitely is not about race. I point out some things that were part of my dad's upbringing because it was a racially biased society, more so and blatantly so when he grew up. But the stories are really about his resilient spirit, how he got through some of these things and worked around them to still be able to survive and thrive. He also had a great, big, beautiful family. He's the second youngest of 19. He's the last one living of the whole family. And he had this big, beautiful family that were devoted and loved each other and supported each other and would stand up for each other. And that came from, that's the foundation rooting that he had. He always felt safe in that bubble of his family. And he was always very devoted to his family and to our family as he became a dad. And it's the lessons that he learned. It's the lessons he gained that he then shared with his children. And in the way he lived his life, with great dignity, with joy, with kindness, meeting every person with kindness, and with a great devotion to his faith.
Now, I'm going to put you on the spot here. I want to hear, what is your favorite story from your father's youth? I know I have mine. I've already picked it, but I'm not going to say it. I want to know I'm making you pick one. Which one is it?
Well, there are so many I didn't even put. I could have put 100 stories in there, but I just wanted to choose a few. I would say there were two. I love the one I was cut out for it, but wasn't sewed up right. I love that one. And then I love the one Go All the Way when my dad was shaving and he said that to me and it shifted everything in my life.
And this was about you going to college, right? Like you needed to do
Yeah.
it. You needed to knock this out of the
Right.
park.
He didn't say it in that he just looked up from his shaving and he was shaved every day. To this day, he shaves every morning. That's part of his routine. And he just looked up and he said, I'm going to need you to go all the way. But what that said to me was in everything, not just school. So that's how I parent. That's how I live. That's how I love. I go all the way. I don't know what halfway is. I do 150 all the time. And that planted those seeds, those little life gems planted in me, in my spirit, gave me this, I got to keep going. I got to keep going. And I just, everything I do is with a full bodied heart, everything that I have. I love my children, like want to stuff them back in the womb. I love my dad, my sisters. I love my friends and my family. I'm very devoted to all of it. I love my career. I love the people I get to work with. Everything I do, I want to be excellent. Dad says everything in love and excellence. And so if I can bring that to everything that I do, then maybe I can leave some smiles along the way.
Now, my favorite of your dad is the loan shark story. I'm not going to give all of it away, but long story short, he's going to borrow some money from a guy that is the leg breaking type. And he says he's going to pay it back with all the intention and something goes wrong. I'm not going to give it away. I just want anybody, the loan shark one. That's my favorite. Now, and he's also a very involved dad. You talk about your mom passing away early. I do want to ask this. There is a particular chapter where you talk about a bad breakup. Do you think that you are the first beauty queen to admit in print that you had a big old snot-nosed cry over a man? Because, I mean, you were very graphic, and I appreciated it because I knew what you were talking about. I just haven't seen a beauty queen admit that in any medium, really.
Listen, I can tell you that every one of them has had a snotty nose, ugly cry about some man that broke their heart. I think even Oprah can say that she probably had a snotty nose cry. They may not say it, but all those things that come to that hurt you or make you feel so sad, if they don't destroy you, they will make you stronger and wiser. I had a friend of mine, she would say this to her daughter. She says, forgive and remember. Not and forget, forgive and remember so that doesn't happen again. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's truly how it was. And I don't know any woman that hasn't had a heartbreak of a breakup. If they haven't, they're very lucky. But usually, in order to find our prince, we got to kiss a few frogs. It doesn't mean it doesn't break your heart when it turns out that the guy you thought was going to be your prince is just a frog.
That's a really good story, though, just because it is after your mom passed, I believe, and he had to, play both roles. I myself, my father passed when I was 14 years old. So, my mom had to do what you had to do when your first husband died and everything. And it's also, you say it too, which I have found as well, when one parent dies early on, a family goes one of two ways. They either just completely explode and everyone goes to the wind, or you get that much tighter. Right. And, from your book, you say you guys got tighter. I know my family Absolutely. Did the same way, which is just you kind of go into emergency mode and you pull together.
And I also think that is the foundation of that togetherness or not togetherness is based on how the parent that survives is able to carry forward. If they fall apart and aren't available for those children that still need a parent, then the children can go. And they could be rebellious anyway in teen years, but I think your mom, my dad, knew that they still had to drive the ship of their families. And so they stepped up a notch to do what they had to do in order to keep us all a family. And aren't we blessed because they did?
And now another parallel, a little bit funnier than the last parallel. We already talked in the beginning. You are, I believe the kids call a hustler, right? You're always doing something. You definitely got that from your dad. I don't even know if we can list how many different jobs he had, but I want to talk about the sandwich making, right? Because I think that perfect. He's already got a job, and he notices, hey, this other person is just selling sandwiches at lunch. If
That's right.
I start making sandwiches in the morning, I can start selling sandwiches at lunch. But I mean, that was your dad in a nutshell, right? Like he was always thinking, he's always saying, I don't have enough jobs, basically.
That's right. I'm not making enough money to take care of my family. I need to make more because my girls need this and my son needs this. So he and my mother were just such a team. They were really ahead of their time in the way that they worked together. Like they had that team union marriage thing down. They were very loving. So I witnessed my parents hold hands and, share a kiss. And so we saw them being loving as well. But that idea that dad said, I need to make some more money because he was bringing home $29 a week from that job. And he and mother would get up in the morning at 5 and make fresh hamburgers and wrap them. And they didn't have a car. Dad was walking a mile and a half, maybe a mile and 3/4 to work each way. And they fashioned a box. I don't want to give the whole story because I want people to read it. And they would use egg crates and put the sandwiches in little sweet potato pies, little custard pies. And that's what they would sell. And in time, very quickly, they were making as much money from selling the pies as he was in his weekly salary. So it became extra money. And people criticized him for that, saying, oh, man, he was walking with this handmade box, you're doing too much. I wouldn't do that. And Daddy said, well, if what I'm doing is bothering you, stop looking because I'm going to do what it takes. And my dad always felt that nothing was beneath him if it meant he could take better care of his family. And I love him forever for that. He got one job because we wanted some go-go boots. Those go-go boots that stick out from your leg and you look like little toothpicks in them. But we wanted those boots. And Daddy got another job so we could have those boots. And he was a go-getter. I think that's where I saw it. I learned it from him. I was like, he always said, if you want something, get a job. If you want something more, get another job. So I've done that. I've had at one time, I think I was working 3 jobs I wanted to know what it was like just to go in the store and shop and not look at the price tag. I did. So I was working 2 8-hour shifts. I would work 3 to 11 at one place, at one ICU, then go and work 11 to 7 at the next ICU place, go home and sleep 4 hours, get up and teach a class in medical terminology at a community college. And then I was playing piano on the side for churches. I did that for about a year and I was shopping. Honey. I was going to the store and saying, I want that. Oh, and it felt so good. I bought myself a little sports car because I paid for it. It felt so good. But I saw the value of work. And my dad showed me the value of work. But nobody was giving me anything. But somebody said this, nothing given, everything earned. Earned. You work for it. And certainly I felt like, I wasn't born with a silver spoon or anything like that. It was just work and integrity and tenacity, which is what my dad and my mom modeled for me. And so it was easy to pick up the mantle of that and run with it. And I did. And I still am. Because my business is all about a hustle. That's what show business is, honey. It's a kickball change every day.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and say I'm not going to check the history on this, but we're going to say that Green Whitaker basically came up with food trucks by himself. We're just going to say that. We're not going to check it against anything.
Okay, we're going to take that. I will say he definitely was one of the pioneers.
Perfect. Is there any one, again, putting you on the spot, asking you for one, is there any one lesson from your dad that really stuck out more than anything else? That if we had to distill them down or just pick one and say, this is the one I'm using most often as a parent or anything like that, is there any one that sticks out?
Yes. Find a way. The story and I won't go into great detail, but my brother was born with special needs. I didn't know it until he was much later. He was probably 8 or 9 months. And my parents had to take him and leave him at a hospital for surgeries for his legs because he had something called spastic cerebral palsy, which affects the lower half. Your motor skills, makes the legs tight and contractured and makes walking difficult. Normal in most other ways, like upper body, but my parents had to take him and leave him, and they would drive 6 hours one way every weekend for 6 months because they didn't want him to think they would ever leave him. They had to work, so that's why they didn't. Mother couldn't stay. She was also. I had 2 parents at work. We didn't have a stay-at-home mom, which I appreciate, and I bless the ones that do. But my mom was wired to work, and they were able to do a little bit more because she could. They just said they wanted to give him the best start that he could have to having a good life. And so they found a way. They found a way. They got into the hospital. They went to see him. He was seeing doctors. They were taking him all of his visits. They found a way. That mantra is when I'm facing something where I feel like I'm against the wall. It may be a left turn to get around the wall. It may be a bridge to go over the wall, but there's a way. You have to find a way. There's always this critical thinking also. Like if something doesn't work, find another way to do it. Find another way to get it done. That's what that taught me. There's not just one way to get something done. There's several ways. You just have to find a way. That speaks volumes even still in my life today.
One of the reasons we founded History Nerd United is a lot of times people think history, nonfiction is going to be boring. It's not going to be something that's going to hold their interest, right? If one of those people said to you, why should I read your book, right? I like my fiction. I don't want to read your nonfiction book. What would you say to them?
Probably say, I think you can learn something. Because even in fiction, there's some things in there that you can take away from, and you go, oh, I'm going to add that into my thinking. I'm going to add that into the way I do this thing or that thing. Every book has something you can learn from, even the fiction. Even if it's just fantasy to take you somewhere, there's always some elements of truth that come through in every book, in every genre. And I think my book will give you some things to think about. Like I say about my dad, either makes you think, makes you giggle, or makes you laugh. So there was these lessons that I think are universal, that I think we can all gain something from in learning how to navigate our lives with more joy and more kindness, and just to keep going. Just keep going. You see my dad, 96 years, he kept going. And I think it's the call to live your life more fully. And you'll get it when you read the book.
Aren't you worried you kind of ruined the curve for children? I mean, you're writing a book about your dad. Now we all got to write books about our parents. I mean, do you still call your dad today and be like, yeah, I'm still your favorite, right, Daddy? I wrote the book.
He makes us all feel like we're his favorite. He's really good at that. I do think that it is important to write the stories down of our ancestors, of the elders, because once they are gone, their voices are gone, and we lose those stories. You don't have to write a book, because if that's not your thing, that's maybe not your thing, but it needs to be in a place where it can be passed down and passed around to the family so that they know the lives and the shoulders upon which they stand and the ones that came before them. So I think if I can encourage people to please write down, not just sit around the campfire or sit around the Thanksgiving table and tell stories, write them down, because you don't want to forget. And you'll go, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that. There's so much in a family that we don't know because we didn't live it, but we can get those stories through oral and written stories that come through. But if it's not written anywhere, how are you going to know? So it doesn't mean, all you listening, that you have to write a book. But you do have to take the time to ask the questions, to write the stories down. This is a preservation for your family. That's what I wanted to do. Not just for my daughters, but for the village that my father raised, which just wasn't our family. He raised a village. If I tell you, if you say his name and anywhere in Cedar Grove, he is beloved and respected and revered, because he would stop if you needed $10, he would give you $10. He raised a village, and that reverberates. Their children. Oh, that's Mr. Green. We rode in a parade for Juneteenth that was in Mr. Green. Is that you, Mr. Green? And his nieces and nephews, they just love him. One of my cousins said to me, when their dad died, we went to Uncle Green with all our problems, and he always had answers. And this is the children of 18 siblings. They still call my dad. So write these stories down. This is, if you can take something away from me having written this book about my dad, is to please get those stories from the elders and the seniors in your families.
All right, Nita, one more question for you.
Okay.
Will you tell Mr. Green hi from me?
I will. I told him I was speaking with you today. I said, I haven't met him yet, but I'm going to meet him. And he said, well, you tell them all I send them my love. That's what Daddy would say.
That's Mr. Green right there.
I would love for you to get the audiobook, because my dad is a part of it. He speaks each one of the chapter titles, because each title is something he said, experienced, or told me. There's also a bonus chapter where we were just talking on the microphone and the guy pushed the button and we got some magic in there, and he is singing. So there's a song of him singing as a bonus track. So I wanted to let the listeners know about that. It is so special to hear him, because I watched my father sing. I'm a singer. And I'm a chip off the old block. I certainly went different direction. My dad pretty much stayed with gospel, and I do everything from opera to pop and everything in between. I don't do bluegrass, and I'm not a rapper, but everything else in between I can kind of do. But my dad, voice and range, I got it from him. It's a genetic gift, and I love that I can share his singing voice on the audio as well. So it's a real treat. If you're not a big reader and you're moving around a lot, and just want to just pop it in your ear and you can listen. You can take your time with it. You don't have to listen all at once. But if you're a reader, get the book, crack those pages and turn the pages, because there's some nice little pictures in there that make the book come alive.
Well, Nita, you sold me. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was great.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that's it for this episode. Nita, thank you so much for coming on. When your hand is in the lion's mouth, go out and get it, everybody. It's going to make you feel really good. It's going to give you some nuggets of wisdom. You'll enjoy it. While you're doing that, also, hey, check us out. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Head over to the blog. Leave us comments. Send us emails. Whatever you want to do. Let us know what we're doing well. Let us know what else you want us to do. Until then, stay cool, nerds.